drawing the legs to us and away from us. We're starting to focus on our natural breath. And then a little bit side to side as we continue to squeeze the thighs, the ankles, and the knees. And then let the side to side turn into circles. And then swapping, interlacing of your fingers, change direction with the circles. And then a little bit more side to side. And then finishing off with some pulsing. And then bringing those thighs up nice and close. You might want to reach over the shins, but making sure that the neck and shoulders are relaxed. So you can get those thighs nice and close. If you're at home and the thighs don't touch, you can put a blanket or a pillow between your thighs and your belly. Let's just focus on a big belly breath here. As you inhale, you want to feel the belly expanding up into the thighs. And as you exhale, you want to feel the belly pulling towards the earth. Inhale, belly expanding up towards the thighs. Exhale, pull your belly down towards the earth. Just really focusing on that gentle movement of the breath within your still body. Really thinking about the thighs as creating resistance for your abdomen. And as much as the breath goes up into the thighs, think about the breath also moving into the back, the sacrum, the tailbone. If you're doing something that requires symmetry, swapping the crossing as you continue to breathe into your belly. Focus on your body from the inside. Focus on your breath. As we take 5 more rounds of breath, just like that. And then when those 5 breaths are complete, we're going to bring our feet down one at a time. I'm going to take our block, I'm going to place it between our seat and between our heels as we come into a creeper pose. So soles of the feet on the floor. We're going to use our heels to push our block into our seat, soles of the feet on the floor. We're just going to take the knees to one another and away from one another a few times, keeping the entire sole of the foot on the floor. So not allowing the big toe edge of the foot to peel off the floor at all. If you've got 2 blocks, have the second block handy, and we'll use that on our belly once we find that connection between the knees. So something that I like to think of is as my knees go apart, it's like a vice or a pushing war between the inner knee and the outer knee. And as my knees go apart, my inner knees are pushing a little harder, but my outer knees are still pushing. And then as my knees go together, my outer knees are pushing a little harder, but still my inner knees are trying to come apart. And then we're going to find that perfect place where we can have our knees as wide as they go comfortably. The heels are pushing the block into sort of the seat, the pelvic floor area. The knees are as wide as they can be without the big toe heels lifting. I'm going to place a block onto our belly. And I might want to take my hands underneath, maybe not under my pelvis today, but maybe on the top lip of the pelvis. Or if it's comfortable for you under the pelvis, then that works too. That's comfortable for your shoulders. And then think about breathing into the belly. Think about breathing from the tailbone up to the top of the pelvis. Think about breathing into that block, which is rooting sort of onto your perineum or your pelvic floor area. As you inhale, think about expanding into that space. And think about expanding into the block on your belly. Continuously focusing on your body from the inside, really focusing on your breath. Let's take 10 more rounds of breath right into our bellies. Think about breathing to the back, the sides, the front, and all the spaces in between. When those 10 breaths are complete, returning once again to your natural breathing. Taking a little break. And flipping the block on your belly so that it's at medium height if it's not already. And then have your fingertips just very lightly touching the block. But start with the pinky and the thumb touching kind of the torso and holding onto the block. And as you breathe into the belly, feel how the block can slide between your fingers. And as you exhale, feel how the block sinks down between the fingers. So as you inhale, the block lifts up between the fingers. And as you exhale, the block slides down between the fingers. Zero force, zero agitation, just focusing on that gentle movement of your belly with the breath. Take 3 more breaths, and on that third breath, let's really think about keeping the belly expanded and then continuing to breathe with that expanded belly. So on that third breath, big inhale, belly expand, block lifts. Try to keep the block lifted as you continue to breathe. And sometimes the breath will get a little more shallow with the expansive belly breath, but seeing if you can keep the belly expanded and continuing to breathe. And one day that breath will be just as long, just as smooth. We want to make sure that there's zero agitation, zero tension physically or mentally when working with something as important as your lungs. Let's take 5 more rounds of breath, just like that, with our expanded bellies. And when those breaths are complete, returning to your natural breath. Let's come to cobbler from here. So keeping the block where it is, allowing the soles of the feet to touch, but keeping the big toe heel edge of the foot rooting into the opposite big toe heel edge of the foot. It's going to give you a little bit of a boundary on those hips. It's going to create as much stability as flexibility. And then we're going to go back to the belly breath moving, and then we're going to find beginar bandha, which is pulling our belly button in, down towards the pelvic floor and back up, so that we're no longer breathing into the belly. And then we're going to breathe into the ribs and the chest today, as a combination. Okay, so just really trying to find that beginar bandha. So first start with the belly breath, so belly lifting and expanding and moving like it has been. Think about the pelvic floor muscles. And I like to think about those pelvic floor muscles as if they're holding onto stems of flowers. So the pelvic floor muscles are engaged, but they're not crushing the flowers. And then feel like the pelvic floor muscles could just pull those stems up the spine. And then the next time the belly drops, pull the belly button in, down towards those pelvic floor muscles, and then back up as you start to breathe into the rib cage and the chest. So the navel pulls down towards the floor, towards the pelvic floor, and then like a backwards J slides up and tucks in on the inside of your back rib cage, which helps to keep those manta ray ribs kind of down. And the front abdomen, we find Samana Vayu, which is the muscles and the flesh and the skin from pubic bone to hip bone to navel. Feel that a little bit heavy underneath that block, and then feel like you're sliding all of that flesh, all of those muscles up underneath the front rib cage. No force, no agitation. You can keep the fingers on that block and just really focus on no longer moving the belly, but allowing the breath to fill the back ribs, side ribs, front ribs, shoulders, armpit, chest, sternum, collarbones, and throat. Let's take 10 more breaths here, just like that. breaths are complete, returning once again to your natural breathing. Eventually transitioning into snowplow where the knees are going to touch and the feet are going to be apart. Let's use the 2 blocks on the torso. No rush to get here, but when you do, knees are touching, we heel toe, the feet apart. 4, snowplow. Place one hand on the, not one hand, one block on the belly and one block on the chest. It can be any which way that works for you. If you know that there's a particular area that you don't breathe into as much, you could try and place the block in that area. And then we're going to combine all 3 of those areas of breath. And we're going to start really focusing on the exhale. So really big exhale to empty. And then once you're empty, belly's going to fill, ribs are going to fill, chest is going to fill. Then you're going to empty chest, then you're going to empty ribs, then you're going to empty belly. Sometimes it's nice to use your fingers on the belly block or your fingers on the chest block, just lightly, to gauge that movement. Or sometimes it's enough to use your peripheral vision. Remember, if anything causes physical or mental agitation in any way, just simply taking a break and starting again when you're feeling more calm. Let's take 5 more rounds of breath, just like this. And once those 5 breaths are complete, return once again to natural breathing. And eventually placing the blocks beside you. We're going to heel toe the feet to one another. We're going to roll off to one side. Doesn't matter which side you're on. Let's just make sure that you can see me for butt kicker. And then let's have our blocks. So there's a couple different options for the arms. So if the shoulders or the neck are having any troubles, then having one block underneath your head and your arms straight out in front of you is a really great option. If you want to work more with like a headstand arm, you can with a bent elbow. Sometimes if you have no neck issues, this is a really fun place to start to train the strength of the neck. So instead of just letting the head be heavy, sustain a neutral neck, push your head into your hand. So almost like a headstand, you have your hand on the back of the skull as opposed to the neck. Instead of being heavy, you kind of float your head and lean back, but neutral neck. So the neck is level. Yeah, and then when you're tired, you can just rest and let that arm become a pillow. So that's another way to just sort of introduce a little bit of neck strengthening. Or a straight arm palm down is more of an armpit shoulder opener. So we're going to do a butt kicker, just the basic one. We're just going to start with the basics. So big toe heel touching. If my thighs are to 90 with my belly, it's going to be more challenging. If I take my thighs away to more like a 120, it's going to be less challenging. I find that working with a 90-degree angle knee bend is really nice. And then we're going to take the block onto the pelvis and one block onto our shoulders. So the block is touching the shoulders and the pelvis. So we know that if we're twisting in any way. So if I was facing away, I'm lying on my side, I've got one block touching my pelvis and one block touching my shoulders. If I only have one block at home, then I'm going to pick which one I want to work on more, okay? There's a really strong habit to move out of a neutral spine. So my knees are stacked, my ankles are stacked, I've got those to show me when I'm cheating. I want to have my feet nice and active, and eventually one day you can even lift the bottom heel up just a little bit. You can have your hand on your hip if you like to feel the pelvis. The block's there, so that's helpful. You could have an outrigger, and then we're just going to start with a little bit of clam. We're going to inhale to bring the right knee up, and we're going to exhale to bring the right knee down. We're keeping the soles of the feet flat like a creeper, as if they were pushing into a floor or a wall. We just go up and down. If our hips were sensitive, we wouldn't have to go all the way up. Good. There's a tendency here that we really lengthen more on the bottom side than the top, so really think about moving your hip away from your armpit so that we're not getting a shortening on that top side of the torso. Then we're going to open that knee up, we're going to hold that knee up, and we're just going to hang out there. Nice deep, full breaths. Again, keeping the feet nice and active. And we're going to try a little bit of pulsing, just tiny, tiny little movements, up and down, up and down, up and down. So small that I can barely see those movements happening. Good. And let that hip have a little rest, find your breath. Fire up both feet, and then eventually we're going to pick up that leg, and we're going to start with big circles with the knee. So the block is there, so we're trying not to move the block for that first round. I like to have a little bit of an outrigger for this one, reaching that elbow away from me. Just exploring that range of motion, and then coming the other way. Really thinking about keeping that bottom leg nice and active. Just keep on breathing. Lower belly pulls in and slides up. And stopping with those circles, let the knees and the feet stack. Take a little breath. So for this next one, the ankle, the knee, and the hip are going to be level. So we're going to lift up that top leg. We want the knee, the ankle, and the hip level. I like to visualize I've got a huge tray for food. And with this one, I want to really move my right hip flexor right back away from my right shoulder. I'm going to exhale to bring the thigh to me. I'm going to inhale to take that thigh away, keeping the ankle, the knee, and the hip level. I'm going to exhale to bring it to me, and I'm going to inhale to take it away. And just noticing if you're hitting that block behind you. Focusing on your body from the inside, focusing on your breath. And the next time we take that right top leg back, we're going to take it back, hold it back. Just holding there. Imagine there's a wall behind you. You don't want your ankle higher than your knee, so you lift your knee so it's as high as your ankle, so it's a neutral rotation. You visualize a wall behind you, and then you're just going to tap, 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 tap an imaginary wall. Like there's a wall maybe a millimeter away from the heel of your foot, and you're just going to tap, 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 tap. Good. And then take that heel as far back as you can, bend the knee as much as you can, and see if you can reach and grab for that foot. Now a lot of us bring the knee up to grab the foot, and that's okay as long as you don't feel the knee, but eventually you want the ankle, the knee, and the hip level. If it's impossible for you to grab the foot, you could use a strap around the foot and pull with the strap just slightly. We want to think about about kicking the foot either into a strap or into a hand. We never feel the knee at all. If we feel the knee at all, then we need to back off. So once we're kicking the foot, we lengthen the quad towards the knee. We think about moving the flesh of the butt away from the low back and the middle of the butt forward towards the hip. We think about drawing the quad back to the seat as the calf kicks towards the shin. Think about the back of the knee moving to the kneecap, and then eventually if all those things are happening and it feels great, we can start to pull our heels towards our butt, really noticing the habits of the ankle. You can feel the ankle here, making sure you're not sickling or creating too many wrinkles in one area, and then eventually we can take that knee back. But let's not have that knee high, because that's going to be a lot of stretch on the inner knee as opposed to a balanced stretch of the whole knee. Good. Focus on your body from the inside, focus on your breath. Good. And so this is great prep for Virasana. So a lot of people can't do saddle pose or recline saddle pose, and so this is a great way to access that strengthening, that stretching with gravity, not getting in the way of progress. Just breathing here. Long holds are recommended, particularly if you've got tight quads. It takes a while to release them. It's also a really nice psoas release, but if you need to come out at any point, feel free. Let's go 10 more breaths here. So, Elizabeth, your neck is up here. You want to have it lower. Yeah, it's a lot for the neck to be there. If you want to try floating it, you can float it for a little bit, but don't crank it up. Yeah, especially with the core work. And then release, let the knees stack, let that hip have a little break. Good stuff. So this time we're going to try and move the blocks. So you're going to want an outrigger. So you're going to bring that top arm out in front of you and you're going to reach with the elbow. An outrigger is not close to your body. It's usually at about shoulders height and it's extending. We're going to lift up that right leg and we're going to make the biggest, hugest circles we can without the left leg moving. We're trying to take out our blocks. You can do 5 or 10 backwards and then 5 or 10 forwards. I like to try and maintain that 90-degree angle. And then eventually change direction with those circles. Really exploring that range. Eventually stopping with those circles. You're going to grab the block from behind you and you're going to put it between your knees. So we're going to work a little bit on internal rotation. So the knees are stacked and the right foot is floating, or top foot I should say. An outrigger is nice here. Okay, we want to keep that neutral pelvis. So here it's nice to spine on the pelvis. You can sight the knees, but you want to keep the shoulders nice and solid. So you could put your block back there if you wanted to. Feet are really active. We want to think about rolling our groins, pulling our groins apart. We want to think about the inner knee dropping the block, the outer knee squeezing the block, and it's between the knees as opposed to the thighs. Yeah. Then we want to really feel our femur, and we want to think of our femur deep inside our hip sockets, and we're going to rotate inside the hip socket to bring that foot up and down. And to get a good range, you have to think of the inner knee dropping the block. If you're squeezing tight, then you're not going to get as much of a range. And this has come so far in 12 months. This was our New Year's resolution last year. So Laura, we're holding a block between our knees and you're not. See how we're doing this? We've got a block between our knees and then we're working that internal rotation. Nice. There you go. And then eventually we're going to bring that internal rotation up, bring that foot up, and just hold. This is really nice for our low backs. And sometimes we do this series in the back bend too. We did that last week in simple back bends. If we have no internal rotation, then that's something we want to work on. That's a real struggle for us. So Laura, we're keeping our knee on the block and you're lifting it. So keep your knee on the block and then internal rotate and just lift the foot. Yeah, that's what we're looking for. Good. And then release that, remove the block, let that rest, and then let's do just the basic on the other side. So coming up when you're ready, coming over to the other side. I'm going to swap the earpiece out. And so when we move from side to side, it's nice to mimic the shoulder, right? So if you had a pillow under your head, then you want to have a pillow under your head on this side, like so. If you want to be working your headstand, like I mentioned, I want to have my neck level, and I want to kind of hold my head there, but I don't want any tension. If it gets tense, then I'm going to let it relax a little bit, or I can have a straight arm, really opening up my armpit. I'm going to take a block behind the pelvis, a block behind the shoulders, and then mimic the angle. Like I said, I like to try and have about a 90-degree angle with my knees. Unless someone's really trying to increase their range in their knee bend, then they could go to like a 45, but a 90 is a really great place to target muscle growth. And then if I wanted my thighs at a 90 with my belly, it would be harder than my thighs at like a 120. But when I do one side and then the other side, I want to try and do those sides the same. You'd have your hand on the hip, or you could have a nice little outrigger with that top arm. Feet are active and pushing into an imaginary floor. And then just kind of like a clam, we're going to open and close. Open and close. So just working with your breath. Inhale up, exhale down. And keeping the shoulders and the hips stacked. And then bring that knee up to hold it up. And again, if I have any hip stuff going on, I could just come down to half my range and hang out there. Good. Just feel those outer hips. We use this a lot for back pain, hip pain, knee pain. I learned it from Helga in a prenatal class years ago. And then a little pulsey, little tiny baby movement, so little that I barely see you moving it. And then eventually let that relax, take some nice deep breaths. You've got your blocks behind your pelvis. And making circles with your knee without moving that block. Sometimes it's a good idea to count your own circles, doing them equal in the two directions. Trying to keep the length on the top side of the torso by moving the hip flexor away from the armpit. It's really humbling the block, okay? And then change direction with the circles. Just breathing here. Really pushing the foot that's on the floor, the baby toe edge of the foot down into the earth. And then once that feels complete, let the knees and the ankles stack. Find your breath. And eventually you're going to lift the ankle, the knee, and the hips so they're level. Just watching that the foot or the knee isn't higher. And then you're going to exhale to take that leg back. And then you're going to inhale to bring it forward towards the rib cage. Exhale to take it back, keeping the ankle, the knee, and the hip level. And bring it back forward. Working with your breath. Thinking about sitting that butt down into a chair as you bring the knee up. Creases moving away from caps. Creases moving towards the caps, and then pulling sort of that hip crease away from the knee crease. And the next time we take that top leg back, we're going to take it back. We're going to try and keep the ankle as high as the knee, and then we're going to tap, 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 an imaginary wall behind you. Try not to let the knee be higher than the foot or the foot higher than the knee. Really thinking about lengthening your quad here. And then taking that heel back, see if you can reach back with your hand. Maybe you can grab the ankle, or maybe you use a strap. If you have to lift the knee to grab, see if you can bring it back down. Use your hand to feel the ankle and try and get rid of any wrinkles. So stage 1, we kick. Next stage, we lengthen the quad towards the knee, as if the knee was pushing into a table. We think about the back of the knee moving to the calf, but the calf moving back onto the back of the knee. Hamstring sliding towards the butt. Flesh of butt really working away from the low back, middle of the butt forward. Think about the back of the knee moving to the kneecap. Think about the calf kicking forward to the shin. If you're still feeling good, then you can start to pull your heel towards your butt. And if you're still feeling good, then you can start to take your quad back towards your neighbor behind you. But always keeping those blocks sturdy. We don't want to change the spine to adjust for the leg. I'm watching that knee isn't too high. Using the strap if we need to. Nice deep, full breaths. Again, you want to float your head occasionally, you can. Get a little bit of neck strengthening, but zero strain. Focus on your body from the inside. Focus on your breath. See if you can find your foot, Natalia. Level out your foot. Let's go 10 more breaths here.
Is this level now?
What's that?
Is the foot level now?
It's better, a little more big toe mound.
Like
there,
this way?
You're doing quite extreme. So go more subtle and just find your big toe mound. There you go. So you feel how it's level now. You can feel the ankle has less wrinkles and the toe mounds are level. You want to feel it, right? As opposed to see it. And then once that's complete, you're going to release. You're going to let that knee come around. Take a little rest here. And for this next one, again, we're going to try and domino the block. So it's a good idea to have an outrigger. Elbows ideally as high as the shoulder. Maybe find all your fingertips and root them. And then big circles. Try to push those blocks out of the way. Try to keep your shoulders steady and move from the hip. And counting your circles. Keep your foot nice and active. So if you have a tendency to lose the big toe mound or the baby toe mound, finding it here on both feet. I like to try and keep my right leg, particularly right foot, totally still, and then changing direction with those circles. Nice, and just keep on breathing. Focus on your body, focus on your breath. And then once you've done those circles evenly, let the knees stack, let everything relax, let the arm hang. And eventually you're going to grab that block, you're going to place it between your knees, and you're going to lift your foot. So the top foot is floating, suspended in air. There's a block between your knees, and the inner knees are dropping the block as much as the outer knees are squeezing the block. And then we're going to work internal rotation, and we're just going to lift that ankle up and down. And it's a great place to notice if one hip has more internal rotation than the other. Good. Just working with your breath, bringing it up, bringing it down. Just gently holding that block between your knees, and you'll find that if you find the inner knee connection of dropping the block, you're going to get more range. And then bringing it up to hold. Think about that rolling of the groins that we did last week, like the groins are pulling apart, and the front groin is moving to the mid groin, and the mid groin is moving to the back groin. And just holding here, breathing. focus on your body from the inside, focus on your breath. Let's go 5 more breaths and then let this go. Getting rid of that block, letting that rest. And then from here, we're going to push ourselves up. Let's make our way into a tabletop position. Let's have our knees right underneath our hips. Let's have our hands ahead of us. They don't have to be right underneath the wrist. If our wrists are sensitive, we want those hands slightly forward, index fingers pointing forward. Let's tap our toes and get a nice grip on those toes. So I like to knead my toes a little bit just to start to wake up not only my feet, but my superficial back line, which is going to be really helpful as we come into some forward folds and some twists. So getting a nice tucking on those toes. Let's sit our feet back onto those feet. Let's press our hands firmly into the floor and start to stretch out those toes. If it's comfortable for us, we can start to walk our hands back. We might even want to take a block or two to support us in that journey. And sometimes it's nice to put the blocks underneath the knees to get that toe stretch. Or sometimes it's better just to keep your hands on the floor. Nice deep, full breaths. It's easy peasy. You can interlace your fingers, bring your hands to the top of the crown of the head, and bring those arms up. But otherwise, just working that toe stretch. Stretching out those toes is more important. We're going to do more shoulder work, so make sure the toe stretch is the priority. Maybe bending your elbows, swapping and interlacing, bringing the hands up again. It depends. I find it's deeper with the knees and the feet together, but occasionally people find it deeper with the knees and the feet apart. Yeah, but they're good. This is usually gentler, so it's not with feet at hips distance. Yeah, it's easier to keep the rotations and stuff. And then bending, bringing those hands forward. Let's come onto the tops of the feet. So we're going to push the tops of the feet into the floor. We're going to find our range here. Try and get the whole front of the foot onto the floor, and then drag the toes to you, and then drag the toes away from you. As if you had a polishing cloth underneath your toes, and you were trying to polish the floor in a straight line. So you drag the toes to you, you drag the toes away from you. And I find with the up dog feet, people get really confused and they just are on their toes, right? So that's the end of your range. I don't want you to be at the end of your range. That's like driving 200 kilometers an hour, especially if you're a beginner driving these feet, right? So drag the feet at like half of that, the middle range. So for me, this is one end of my range, this is the other end of my range. I find the middle. Good. And then I'm going to see if I can bring my feet and my butt to one another. Just like we did before, I could use blocks, but I'm not going to compromise the shape of my foot. Isn't that word? I hated the word shape. I was like, it's not a shape, it's a pose, right? Modern yoga terminology. And again, it's easy peasy. You can throw in the little shoulders, but it's better to, it's more important that we're working the feet here than it is that we're throwing in the shoulders. Couple breaths with one crossing, couple breaths with the other crossing. Breathing here, and then eventually coming back down. Let's go back into a top toe. Let's take our seat back towards our feet, and we can either stay in a puppy, or we can choose to come into a down dog. And sometimes people want to do an up dog foot. They can do one at a time, just to get a gist for it. And sometimes I like to do down dog and an up dog foot, but I have, no problem taking my shoulders over my head when I'm doing an up dog foot in the previous posture. But you could start with kind of just doing one foot at a time. Or staying in your puppy. But if you're doing it, really look at your ankles fingers underneath your ankles. And John, I'm going to give you another block. And you're probably going to want to go lengthwise with the block. Like this.
Okay.
Breathe. I think you'll be more stable.
Okay.
So we're sitting on our blocks. We've got an ankle lift. If you can get an ankle lift on one block, by all means go for it, but that's not usually the case, right? So don't sacrifice the ankle lift to sit on one block. And then we're just going to rock on our sit bones, and we're going to find the center of our sit bones.
I think I need another block.
You got it.
Oh. Sorry.
Start with this guy. And sometimes when you're sitting on 3, it's easier for some weird reason to go lengthwise. It just fits better. It's the weirdest little thing. And then once we find the center of the sit bones, let's do a little bit of shoulder work. So let's interlace our fingers, right hand on top of left, hands come to the back of the skull, root to the head. Let's start by pulling the elbows to one another and taking the elbows apart. Just opening and closing those armpits. And so we have a range, we go way back, and we can bring those elbows to touch. But we want to keep the ribs engaged and the elbows nice and active. We want to keep those fingers from coming apart. And then we're going to take the elbows so they're shoulders distance apart. You're going to lean your head into your hands, and your hands are going to push on your head. So as we mentioned before, strength training our neck is such a good thing. Okay, so you're actually pushing back with your head, and your hands are actually pushing your head forward. And then we're going to start with some circles with the elbows. But you want to keep that idea of strength training your neck whilst we're doing these elbow circles. And then change direction with the circles. Keep on breathing. And stopping with the elbow circles, bring the elbows to shoulders distance apart. See if you can bring them in and out, and see if you can bring them in and out as you take them wide, and in and out as you bring them forward. And stopping with that, we're going to take the hands to the top of the skull, head's going to root back, and then we're going to start with little circles, just little circles. And I could do them out in front of my chest if my shoulders were really fatiguing, or I could start to make those circles bigger. If I had a spare block because I wasn't sitting on 2, I think we've got Lara doing that, I could throw a little block on my hands. And I want to think about the elbows moving away from one another, and let's stir it up the other way. And then stopping with the circles, we're just going to go straight up and straight down. And then we're going to go straight up to hold up. See if you can keep those pinky fingers engaged. Close your eyes, make sure your shoulders aren't hitting your neck. Nice deep, full breaths. Let's go 5 more breaths here. And then when those 5 breaths are complete, if you have a block, just ditch it. Release your fingers, but pull the fingers to you. Push the palms away, take it down halfway. And feel like you're karate chopping back with your pinky fingers. Relax your shoulders. Let your right ear come down. just rotate your chin towards your right shoulder. So this is a nice way of getting to that delt area. Chin comes back up to center, opposite ear comes down. Really lift up your collarbones, press into your hands, pull your fingers to you, and then rotate your chin. Keep breathing. Chin comes back up to center, release, interlace your fingers behind you. See if you can straighten out your arms, shoulder heads back. If you can straighten out your arms, you can bring your palms together and then just drop your chin towards your sternum. Big, beautiful breaths. And then chin comes up, release your hands, relax your ankles, close your eyes, take a few deep breaths into the shoulders.